Well, the haters gonna hate, 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 and the faker's gonna fake, 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 baby. I'm just gonna make, making luck, a Dominion podcast.
Welcome back to Making Luck, the Dominion podcast. We're going to start off with a kingdom that we had from last time. But actually, first, we're going to start off by thanking you for all the feedback you gave about the whole kingdom at the beginning and end segment. Some mixed opinions there for sure. But overall, it was positive. We're definitely going to take the feedback. There are some suggestions there. We're going to do whatever we think we reasonably can, particularly depending on, how many people we have being able to work on it. I think soon we're going to have more co-hosts back, so it's not just going to be one of us talking to ourselves about a kingdom, which should hopefully help. If you don't like the segment, I guess I'm sorry, but we may try to see if we can find a way to, put some timestamps in the beginning or in the description that would show, like where you could skip to if you want to just skip out on listening to the kingdom at the beginning and the end and that kind of stuff. But anyway, let's get into this kingdom from last time. Just going to remind our audio-only listeners what the kingdom is, and it's kingdom from a game I played, game on the online client number 298711895, if you want to look that up in various places. But the kingdom itself is Candlestick Maker, Haven, Ratcatcher, Ghost Town, Exorcist, Miser, Workers Village, Den of Sin, Embassy, Venture, with the project Crop Rotation, and the event Training. Once again, that's Candlestick Maker, Haven, Ratcatcher, Ghost Town, Exorcist, Miser, Workers Village, Den of Sin, Embassy, Venture, with Crop Rotation and Training. And unfortunately for this week, I didn't actually get to play any human-on-human games past the original game, which spawned the kingdom in the first place, that I played as a where it was a randomly generated kingdom. I played a lot of solitaire games against the bot, and for the most part, I think this is more or less you're racing the opponent, just trying to get to a stranglehold on the points as fast as possible. So I think that's a pretty good proxy, although it's close enough that it's not 100% clear that some of the interactions that do exist might still be important. In the actual game that I played, I went for silver, got Den of Sin in the crop rotation on turns 3 and 4, and then did basically Embassy Money, had 3 provinces on turn 9, and my opponent basically just resigned. Then they had gone for some Miser business. I think those are basically the two strategies that make sense to think about in large place here. Jake was kind of advocating for this Miser strategy, and he thought about opening Exorcist and then getting into Miser, but he also thought about just opening Miser, I think. So I played several times with that strategy. I think, if you can get the Exorcist thing to work, it might have a little bit more oomph in some manner, but you're pretty... so some people pointed out that the wisps aren't going to do that much because you're taking the coppers out of your deck. I'm not really that worried about that. You're going to have a few different wisps, and in order to get that deck to work, you're going to be taking ghost towns, and you're going to turn them into imps later, so it's not really that much of a problem. The problem I see is if you don't hit 4 fast enough and you don't get your misers fast enough, it can just kind of fall apart and be too slow. Hitting 4 is not necessarily so easy. That's part of why you want ghost towns for this deck. But it can work. I think it's a little bit worse than the Ratcatcher version, but it's not like a massive difference. On the other hand, like a half a turn on average difference might be, particularly if you're not mirrored, might be really important. I think so. The thing about the Exorcist is it eventually has, when I say more oomph, it's because it has more draw in it, because you're turning stuff into imps, and having more draw is important, because being able to draw everything is kind of critical in this deck. So having the more draw at the end means that when you have the big turns at the end where you're scoring your points, they're bigger because you have more draw. But if you go for the rat catcher plan, miser rat catcher, you're just you're a little bit faster. There's a big difference whether you get your rat catchers to miss the shuffle or not, which means you need to draw it exactly on turn 3 to have it not miss. Obviously, also if your miser misses a shuffle, that's also a big deal. But the rat catcher miser tended to work out okay. I think kind of the middle median average that I was getting was getting to about 5 provinces on turn 13, but with 0 provinces after turn 11, right? It was all coming more or less at once. And it didn't really have the opportunity to turn really many of those provinces into like double duchy or anything. It was like, yes, I could buy duchy instead of province, obviously, but it's not like I could have 4 provinces and 2 duchies very often. I did get off 1 turn earlier, like once, and I got a turn later a few times. But turn 13 was kind of the solid average there. And then, so the other strategy, and what I think is best, is along the lines of this money embassy strategy that some of you advocated for in the comments and which I played in the game. But there's a few important points to mention there. So you open silver, silver, and then if you hit 6 on turn 3, you get crop rotation, and you're guaranteed to hit 5. This is if you hit exactly 6 on turn 3. You're guaranteed to hit exactly 5 on turn 4. So you get crop rotation and a 5, which in that case should be embassy, I think. And then, yeah, basically you're buying province, or if you miss province, you're getting either gold or den. Or if you hit less than den, maybe silver or ghost town. It's not exactly clear. You control your shuffles a little bit depending on when you're seeing your embassies and your dens, and just try to be provincing as often as possible. If you don't hit 6 on turn 3, you've got a little bit over 20% to hit it on turn 3. If you hit exactly 5, then you can get a Den of Sin. And when you play that Den of Sin, you're going to draw the rest of your deck on turn 4, which means you're going to hit 6, so you can get that crop rotation. And then you're going to want to get an embassy and then start provincing very similarly. If you hit less than 5, I'm not sure. In some situations, it might be correct. Correct. Adam hates that term. Yeah, I don't know what's correct. I'm not sure whether it is correct to get a ghost town or a silver. I think in some abstract sense, one of them is quote-unquote correct. Adam's going to hate me while he's listening to this, editing it. But it's very hard to tell which is which because it's a complicated game later on down the road. Like, obviously, the ghost town is a little bit better for turn 4, but it's going to be a little bit worse down the line probably because you're not really getting more than 1 embassy here. You're not really getting more than 1 action card here, really. So, but hitting 6 earlier is nice. I think I tend to like silver just because I think that the later impact of having the extra silver versus the ghost town in your deck is enough to make it a little bit better. And I think embassy on turn 4 is not that much worse than getting crop rotation on turn 4. I think I'd rather have crop rotation, but I don't think the difference is that massive. So I think I like silver on turn 3, but I'm not 100% sure, and it might depend on exactly which cards you've seen on turn 3. It wouldn't surprise me if you would crunch out all of the math and work out, I could probably math out over the course of a few weeks which of these is better. I'm definitely not going to do that because I don't have time to spend a few weeks doing that, and who cares really. But it wouldn't surprise me if it did depend a little bit on the draws or whatever at various points. Basically what I'm saying is there may be certain points where you take ghost towns. I rarely did, except maybe at the very, very end of the game. I generally was just taking silver. There are little ways to optimize this, but basically, yeah, you want to hit crop rotation on turns 3 or 4. Den really helps you do that. So you're a favorite to be able to hit crop rotation on turn 3 or 4, given that you're about 50-50 to just get either 5 or 6 on turn 3, which guarantees it. And if you hit less than 5 on turn 3, then you're better than that 20% to hit it on turn 4, even if you are getting a silver, because you've had a sub average amount of money on turn 3, basically. So I don't know what the exact chances are. I didn't math that out. But the point is, the crop rotation, between crop rotation and embassy and some dens and stuff, it's very, very possible to hit province pretty consistently very fast. This is like quite strong in terms of how money strategies are. And yeah, the average for this, again, turn 13 was around when I was getting to 5 provinces. But pretty often that was with a duchy. Sometimes it would be a little bit slower. It really depends on kind of how the embassies and the draws worked out there. Hitting embassy at the bottom of your shuffle is pretty bad for this strategy, but you're kind of unlikely to hit it at the bottom that often. So it could be worse, and it could definitely lose in the head-to-head matchup. I'm not saying it's going to be like a 95% win rate or something for one or the other. But yeah, long story short, I think the money strategy is better because, if the miser deck, there aren't going to be 5 provinces left for it to take the 5 provinces, so it's got to get duchies. The money deck has the 3 estates, which actually matter. It's also likely to get a duchy, and like it nut draws some non-trivial percentage of the time, right? I've hit 6 provinces on turn 12 multiple times in testing this out. I've hit 6 provinces on 13, a reasonable amount. 5 provinces and a duchy on turn 13 is very doable. When you get to the end game, obviously you need to adjust to see where your opponent is, and that may affect whether you go for greening more, or whether you get a den because I need right now. I'm also not sure when to take den versus gold in this deck. There's probably some optimizations, not just with the ghost town, but whether you discard. Maybe you don't discard for your crop rotation because you're trying to control your shuffle, something like that. Maybe you don't play a den because you're trying to control the shuffles, that kind of thing. I did a little bit of this when it was obvious, like I have my embassy in hand and it's going to draw me 5 cards, and so if I crop rotation, then it's going to trigger shuffle, and I don't really want to trigger shuffle because I don't want embassy to not be in the shuffle, etc., etc. And I was going to hit province anyway, I knew. So long story short, there's optimizations probably on both of these strategies. They're roughly the same speed, but I think that just the being a little bit faster to 4 provinces is going to make the greening less efficient. Being faster to 4 provinces from the money deck would make the greening less efficient from the miser deck, I think. So I think I give the lean to the money deck. I think it's also more or less a half a turn to a turn faster as well. On 2-5 or 5-2, I might consider going for the miser deck because, well, it wants a rat catcher, and the other deck kind of doesn't want rat catcher or candlestick maker or haven. The big question mark for me is how much the silver from the embassy is going to affect the miser deck, but I think it's actually one of the rare cases where the silver actively hurts. Maybe if you're going for the Exorcist version, the silver doesn't hurt as much because you need the money and you can turn it into an imp. So that's something to think about for that version of the deck. But in the non-Exorcist version, then like the money is not really what you're tight on as much as draw, and the silver kind of might get in the way. You have huge payload at the end, and it's just being able to get your deck drawn enough and have enough buys to be able to achieve and realize that payload. So I think the silver might actually be certainly not a big positive, I think, except maybe for the Exorcist version. So at the end of the day, I think the money deck basically here is better, but yeah, I haven't had the direct matchup of the two decks, and it's not 100% sure how the silver from the embassy is going to affect things. But let's move on to our main topic, which is talking about Beggar, as you probably know. So, Beggar is a 2-cost action-reaction card from the Dark Ages expansion, and it says, gain 3 coppers to your hand. And then there's a line, and then below the line is the reaction part. It says whenever another player, actually it doesn't say whenever, it says when another player plays an attack card, you may discard this, i.e. the Beggar, to gain 2 silvers, putting 1 onto your deck. And obviously the other one just goes into your discard pile as like a normal gain. So let's start with the I'm just going to add it to a random deck section. Cool story. I probably wouldn't, but let's talk about why, and let's talk about situations where you might, just in a quote-unquote random deck. So if you had just have this in a random deck, effectively the turn you play the Beggar, it's going to make you 3 money, assuming the coppers aren't gone, which they usually aren't. So it makes you 3 money, and terminal gold for 2 would be very good, but it doesn't just make you 3 money, it forces you to stick 3 coppers in your deck, right? Yeah, 3 coppers in your deck is typically quite a bad thing. Coppers are bad cards for your deck the vast majority of the time, and I mean the vast majority of the time. You really don't want coppers almost ever. So like terminal gold isn't that good of a card, and adding 3 coppers to your deck makes it like quite bad. The downside quite outweighs the upside. So like if you randomly have a Beggar in your deck or in your hand, in most of the cases you should not play it even given the choice, because adding the 3 coppers to your deck is not worth the benefit right now. Usually there's going to be some exceptions, obviously. But let's take a look a little bit closer, depending on what kind of deck you're looking at, because that's obviously going to be important. So let's talk about a money deck. In a money deck, first of all, the big issue you're going to have is terminal space, because other terminals are often going to be better. But let's say you somehow have the terminal space. There's no or few other good terminals on the board. So let's say you have the terminal space. Yeah, on the turn you play it, this is going to be good, because terminal gold is good in a money deck. But adding 3 coppers, like we've talked about, is really bad, especially for a money deck. Maybe not especially, but yeah, probably less especially for a money deck. But it's bad for a money deck, even if it's worse for other decks. Driving your money density toward 1 is away from where you want to be. It's not like the end of the world if you have to play it once, but it's pretty bad. The other thing to note, though, is in a money deck, the opportunity cost of adding Beggar is usually like fairly high. Because mostly of the terminal space, but also it's pretty rare that you have 2 money exactly and a buy that's just hanging free in a money deck. So like usually it's costing you at least a silver, and like 3 money at terminal speed. Terminal speed? That doesn't. I feel like that should be a phrase, but it doesn't. Speed really has nothing. Anyway, 3 money for on a terminal compared to 2 money on a treasure. The 3 money is not that big of an upside for a large part of the game. The downside of taking coppers is big, and the downside of being terminal is big. So like silver's almost always a better card for money decks, and that also leaves you out from any other 2s or 3s or whatever other amount of money you might be able to get, which are often better than both silver and this card. So yeah, it's really not where you want to be in most money decks. But if you're drawing your deck, let's take a look at that. If you're drawing your deck, then this is 3 money this turn, and it's 3 money next turn because you have the coppers again. You're drawing them, you get the 3 money next turn, but you can also play it again, so it's kind of 6 money next turn, and then 9 money the turn after that. So it's just like this growing amount of money, kind of like treasure trove, but that presupposes that you have infinite draw to be able to draw all these cards, and you don't have infinite draw like ever. So in reality, it's adding 3 coppers to your deck, and adding 3 coppers to your deck in a deck which is trying to draw itself every turn is really hard to cope with in the vast majority of situations, because well, it's 3 extra cards you have to draw, so you have to like add an extra smithy and village or 2 labs or something to be able to draw that. You have to add that every turn, and the benefit of adding 3 money to your deck is like not worth that usually, especially since it comes at terminal speed. I'm gonna make this a thing, terminal speed. It's like warp speed, but terminal speed. I don't know. Instant speed and magic, terminal speed and Dominion. Let's make that a phrase, or not make it a phrase. leave a comment in the comment section whether you like the phrase terminal speed. Anyway, um, yeah, the three coppers, it's really hard to cope with. Not only because you just have to add three extra draw to your deck, but also, right, it makes you less reliable because your random starting hand, you're going to have more of a chance for coppers to get in between your combination of draw cards that you need to actually draw. So, right, again, okay, maybe you can get away with playing it once and the deck can manage drawing three extra cards, although even in this case, it's generally like a hardship. There's a reason why trashing your coppers is good most decks, and especially in these decks that are trying to draw. So like even one is usually pretty bad, but sometimes you might be able to get away with it. I don't know how, why you'd want. Anyway, you might be able to get away with it. It shouldn't ever come up because you shouldn't be like aiming to do this, but you might be able to get away with it once. But like doing it multiple times is not really something you can sustain. So you'd okay, we're gonna edge case this. If you have like Counting House, that is a way that you can make it infinite draw. You have some plus buy card, which lets you make use of the extra payload, and then you have enough actions and in. So this is like a 6 card combo or something. So like you have enough action cards in your discard, and you play your counting. You play some, like an in, and then you play a workers village, and then you play your Counting House, and you draw all these coppers, and you buy a Counting House. No, you buy an inn. No, you already have another Counting House. You buy an inn, and then you buy a province, and then you maybe have more plus buy cards, so you can buy more other stuff. Did I mention you play the Beggar in here? Yeah, so then you have this like huge contraption of stuff, and you never shuffle again. So you have enough actions in your discard that when you shuffle them back out by buying the inn, it doesn't, like, you don't trigger a shuffle. You just have all these action cards stacked up on your deck. So you get to this place where you're just like consistently never shuffling and just drawing an ever growing number of coppers with your Counting House. Like, this never happens, but if you want to edge case, then you can edge case. There's maybe some other weird edge case stuff where like you can set up with like a ton of workers villages, and I don't know, but like you can't do that, and why would you want to do that? So like you wouldn't add a triple copper gainer to your decks. Like why would you want to do that? You wouldn't. So don't. Yeah. So in the I'm just going to add it to my deck in a random point, you should not do that. You should have a real reason. Having said all that, though, there is several points where I've been spectating games where I've noticed that a situational play of getting what you might call a hashtag tactical beggar is something that I think is very reasonable to do, and something that I think people should have done, and people almost never think about it, because Beggar is not a card you want to add in these decks, so they don't. And okay, it's very reasonable to not think about because you only have so much mind space, and Beggar in a lot of decks, most decks, is just a card you just ignore. So I definitely don't blame people for doing that. But there are situations where you would want to do this. Now, okay, well, it's situational. What is the situation that we're looking for the hashtag tactical beggar? Roughly speaking, it's when you know that you're going to only have one more shuffle after where you are right now. You have a small amount of money and a buy free, and your terminal space is not highly constrained. So, and the money is something that you might be looking for, right? So it needs to be that draw isn't the important thing for you, that having the extra payload might be important from getting the beggar, that it's not opportunity costing you too much. You have the terminal space, and the game is going to end pretty soon. So that's like 5 things, and all 5 of those things are somewhat reasonably often going to happen in a game. But all 5 of them happening simultaneously is quite rare. But it comes up in, I don't know, like a small but non-negligible percentage of beggar games. It happens probably more in money kind of paradigm, where you're not drawing that much. And it definitely comes up a lot more than the I have counting house and like three other enablers things that I was talking about in the weird edge case a second ago. Um, the difference is also not that big because, again, usually the alternative is a silver. Now, if you have exactly two, then it's kind of a bigger deal, but usually the alternative is like just a silver, especially in these money decks. And okay, it's not like there's a big difference, and especially if terminal space is at all an issue, then it's really not a big difference. But having that extra one money that one time, it can be better than silver in a reasonable percentage of cases where you're just, that you're not going to see a lot of shuffles, and so the game is ending quite soon, and that beggar the one time might give you the one extra money you need. Be a little bit better than a silver in these situations. Basically, that's what it is, and it gives you, like, if you combine how it's only a good play a small percentage of the time, and in that percentage of the time it's only going to win you a small percentage of games that you wouldn't otherwise have won anyway, then like the whole upside of this tactical beggar situation is, I'd be pretty surprised if it's going to add more than 1% across like all games that beggar is in to your win rate. But in the exact situations that you find yourself in, it might add several percent, a few percent, I don't know. So like overall, if you just never think about the tactical beggar, you're probably not losing too much. And if you try to go for it too much, you might be losing a lot. So again, I don't want to overstress this, but like there is this situation where a hashtag tactical beggar can come up. It is something to be aware of if you're really trying to optimize your play. But for the most part, you don't want to just add a random beggar to your deck because it's a pretty bad card. There's also the reaction, though. Let's talk about the reaction for a second. People forget about the reaction all the time. And I mean, literally forget about the reaction. I've had numerous conversations with people where people have just completely forgotten that the reaction existed. Because it doesn't come up very much. It doesn't come up very much. I don't blame people for forgetting about the reaction to Beggar. You don't get Beggar for the reaction for the reaction, or even primarily for the reaction, almost ever. There's a lot of problems as to why you don't want to get it for the reaction. I'm going to highlight the discard. For the reaction to be good, to be like a major part of your game plan and not just something that like I had the beggar anyway and so I might react. Like that definitely comes up, right? It helps in the games where you already wanted beggar. If you're getting a lot of beggars, sometimes you're going to end up with them colliding, and then in those games getting silver is usually fine, because if you're getting beggar, you're fine with adding 3 coppers to your deck if they come in your hand. So if you're fine with adding 3 coppers to your deck, then you're probably fine with adding 2 silvers to your deck. Yeah, so if they collide, then you often want to react. But like I'm talking about just adding the card for the reaction, that rarely comes up because what you need is you need to be okay with playing with a 4-card starting hand sometimes because you have to discard the beggar. You need to want 2 silvers, which, okay, you got a beggar, so you probably do, but if you're just getting it for the reaction, like, you need to want 2 silvers in your deck. You need to want one of them on top of your deck, or at least be okay with that. You need the board to have attacks on it. You need your opponent to be playing attacks on you, and you need this board with attacks that your opponent wants to play to have all of these other things be true in such a way that, like, you're not better off just doing the attack thing, right? And that's the big thing is, like, beggar and the attacks don't often play well together, and the attacks are stronger a huge percentage of the time, and if they're not, then if you go for beggar, your opponent might just not get the attack, and then you're not reacting anyway. And so, like, it's really hard for all of these things to come up together. But let's talk about a couple of situations where it might seem more reasonable. If you're getting discard attacked anyway, then you're going to have 4-card hands. But on the other hand, if you're getting discard attacked anyway, then how good is silver really? Because if you're starting from a 3 card hand, which most discard attacks do for you, then um, well, silvers, a load of them is not going to get you to 8 if you're starting from 3 cards all the time. So, if you're drawing anyway, okay, great. But if you're drawing anyway, then maybe just adding a bunch of silvers all the time. And like you need a way to get the beggar into your hand at the start of your turn. So, hashtag. But if you're getting top deck attacked, yeah, so like there's certain trashing attacks. Knights, Rogue, Saboteur, I don't know. If you're getting those, then right, react the beggar. There's a silver on top of your deck. The trashing attack eats that instead of whatever else it was eating. I guess maybe Noble Brigand or Thief or Pirate Ship, but like you're for sure having them hit a silver for you then. So is that a good thing or not? I don't know. I guess Bandit, right, also falls into that kind of category. Um, yeah, so it might look like Beggar is a good defense to, say, Knight's attack, right? Um, in reality, it doesn't really work out that way. Like, I don't want to add Beggar to my deck just because of Knights, because, right, you need to have it in your opening hand, and if that's what you're doing, then you're not doing much else for yourself in those cases, right? Like, again, something else should be better. You should be trying to play the knights yourself. You should be, if they're good. If they're not good, then you should just be ignoring them entirely, right? If you happen to have 2 in a spare buy and knights are flying around a ton, maybe you can add Beggar then. I'd still be pretty skeptical of it because you have to draw the Beggar all this times, and what if they don't play a knight on you and all this other stuff? And I guess you can play it tactically if it comes up later, but like it's not a great defensive reaction. It might be something you add against knights, but it's not like I've countered their knight strategy because I have beggars in my... No, it does not counter your knight strategy because you have beggars in your deck. It can slightly offset it, maybe, but it's not really where you want to be. You have this card that you need to have in your opening hand to do anything because you don't want to play it. And gaining the 2 silvers, okay, whatever. I think we've covered this enough. It's not a great defense, but it's No, we haven't covered this enough. I want to drill. You don't. It's not a good defense. It is not a good defense. It might be something you get sometimes, but it's not a good defense because, like, right? There's these 2. You know, the knight's going to hit the silver instead, but like you had to draw the beggar every time. You have to draw the beggar every time. Whether you play it or not, whether you react or not, you have to draw. It's an extra card to draw. It's like this dead card. It's like you've set this estate in your deck that it's like kind of like a moat, but you can't play it for effect. You can only react for effect. And like, sure, gaining 2 silvers is not just 1 to negate that knight's attack, but like is like a lighthouse or a moat that doesn't actually do anything for it. Well, it gains a silver, kind of, if you react it, but like you can't play it, right? I mean, you can play it. You can gain the 3 coppers, and maybe there's some weird situation where that will be something that comes up, like again at the end of the game. But for the most part, you really don't want to play it. So it's just as a reaction, and like if you're getting hit with the knights this often, like the beggar, adding a beggar is not really going to save you, right? If you are doing this and your opponent's playing multiple knights and you have multiple beggars to react, you probably want to react like 1 at a time. So react 1 and then they hit you and then they play another knight and then you react the other so that the 2 silvers don't get revealed from the 1 knight's attack. But this is like super edge casey because you shouldn't be doing it anyway, and you shouldn't be getting multiple beggars, and you shouldn't have multiple beggars in your hand. And okay, let's go. Yeah. Oh, I guess if you get swindlered into beggar, yeah, it can come up then. And having a silver on top of your deck for swindler is not such a bad thing. You don't want to get, again, you don't want to get beggar for these cases, really. Similar reason to the knights, although it's I don't know, whatever. But like, you also don't want to swindler their estates into beggars very much because, right, they can react them then. Uh, so that's pertinent with Swindler, right? Typically, it's such a bad card you might think, they don't want to play it, so it's worse than estate. But and also at the end of the game, they can play it, right? So even at the end of the game, like at the very end, if they're not going to see the beggar again, okay, then yeah, turn the estate into a beggar. If they are going to see the beggar like one more time, then okay, maybe the point is relevant, but also maybe the tactical beggar situation might be relevant. But okay, this is just like the random, I just randomly have it in my deck, or do I want to use it for a reaction segment? The real important part of beggar is the synergies. And there are a number of synergies which can make beggar legitimately something that you want to go for, although some of these that I'm going to describe are still rather fringy and edge casey. So we're going to start more on that end and move more towards things which are actually strong, although it's not a direct line, stronger, stronger, stronger all the time. It's going to be kind of mixed in between. You'll see as I talk about it. But we're going to start with the case where coppers aren't bad for you. Right? I said the vast, vast majority of the time coppers are bad for you, but it's not 100% of the time. So, right, let's talk about decks where coppers are good cards. Yeah, I guess Fountain, it gets you 3 coppers right away. And again, that's more of a tactical beggar thing than like part of your strategy. But like, yeah, if I'm going to have another shuffle or maybe just over another shuffle so I can make sure that I play my beggar once, adding the 3 coppers to score 15 points is pretty good. And then it doesn't do nothing. So towards the end of the game, you don't need to do it early on. You don't need to get those points early on. But towards the end of the game, you might add a beggar as an efficient way of getting to your fountain points. Yeah, okay. But let's talk about copper being a good card, like for your actual deck. Yeah, if copper's good, then like you're not trying to draw a lot because copper really gets in the way there. Or I don't know, maybe you have a way of dealing with the coppers, but we're getting to that in a second. But copper, is a good card, I guess, for your deck. Well, you're not drawing your deck, like I said. You're therefore probably playing money density. Otherwise, coppers don't help you like do any of the other weird third way shenanigans where you're like playing a deck that's just based around gaining several things in a turn, but also not drawing. Yeah, like beggar definitely doesn't help you there. Copper doesn't help you there. It gets in the way still. So you're playing money density, and copper makes your money density closer to 1 per card or 5 per turn. And so you need to be aiming for that amount or lower. So what are decks that can actually go off of like 5 per turn? Well, the only real thing I can think of is Duchy Duke. Beggar is okay for Duchy Duke decks, but it's not like a strong enabler by any means, because this is one of the places where averages kind of break down. Yeah, it brings your average pretty good, but what ends up actually happening is you end up with, yes, some hands which make exactly 5 because you have 5 coppers in them. You have a lot of coppers in your deck, so that's going to happen a non-trivial percentage of the time. You're going to have a lot of hands which make 4 because you have 4 coppers and a green card. And then you're going to have some hands which have beggar in them, which make more than 4, but they usually make like more than 5 as well. So they're making 6 or 7. 6 is like kind of the most common because you have beggar, 3 coppers, and a green card. Sometimes you have like 2 beggars and 2 coppers and a green card or something. And okay, sure. But right, the extra 6, if you're just trying to hit Duchy Duke, the extra money from the 6 doesn't help, and that you hit 4 and 6 more often is a lot worse for Duchy Duke than hitting 5 all the time. So it's not really a great enabler. You don't want to get too many beggars, and part of that's because the beggars colliding is kind of disaster, and part of it's because of this non-uniformity to the money that I'm talking about, where you hit 4 and 6 a lot, and what you really want to do is hit 5 every turn. So yeah, beggar's not a great enabler. Having said that, like 1 beggar is still pretty good because adding the extra coppers helps to offset. And right, you have a bunch of coppers in your deck, and then if you have a bunch of silvers instead of the extra beggars. You're hitting 5 more often. You don't have the collision problems that you might have with getting extra beggars. Keep in mind that beggar is just better than silver unless they collide in the hand that you're actually in. And then gaining the extra coppers is typically not bad on average. So it's not that like beggar is tons worse than silver, but because the collision is a real thing, you don't want to go too overboard on the beggars here. But also because of the 4-6 thing, beggar is really marginally better than silver, and so the collision issue is a really big deal. But like almost any other enablers are going to be better. So like, mill is a much better enabler, horse traders is a much better enabler. There's a lot better enablers than beggar, with the caveat being that the reaction is real in this deck, right? Yeah, reacting beggar to gain 2 silvers and one of them on top of your deck is really good if you're trying to hit 5 a lot. Now, if you're trying to hit 4 or less, then yeah, coppers are actually really great, and getting a bunch of beggars and just flooding with a ton of coppers, you're going to be able to hit 4 quite consistently. Having said that, I don't know why you're trying to hit 4 a lot, because there aren't very many situations. There is one exception, which is kind of a whole other combo with beggar. I'm going to talk about that later. If you're trying to hit 6 a lot, like I just talked about with the Duchy Duke thing, beggar is going to hit 6 pretty often in the hands where you find beggar. So you can kind of do that, but you're also going to have obviously a lot of these hands where you don't have a beggar, and so you're not hitting 6 that way. Again, I also don't really know why you're trying to hit 6 a lot. It's not like you're going to hit it a lot, because you're going to have a lot of these hands, so it's more that you're trying to hit it fast, and the coppers aren't that bad for hitting 6 consistently. Yeah, I really can't come up with a way that this could be good, so don't. Yeah, so the coppers being not bad for you is basically not something that is hugely important. But if you're getting attacked in some way, and you're trying to go for Duchy Duke, or if you're trying to hit 4 a lot, I don't know why. Anyway, yeah. But moving on from that, beggar as a way to add food, which is kind of a way that the coppers aren't bad for you. Like you're going to trash them. And sometimes you just need to be able to add extra cards to your deck so you can trash them. Sometimes they have to be treasures. I think the biggest case for this is Spice Merchant. So Spice Merchant runs out of food. Sometimes, you don't have any treasures left. And, okay, not just Spice Merchant. Spice Merchant is not by itself a reason to get beggar, because, like, adding 3 coppers to your deck, the point of getting the Spice Merchant was to get the coppers out of your deck. It's not to draw cards, because it doesn't really draw cards, because, right, you spent a Spice Merchant and copper in hand, and you drew 2 cards and got your action back. You're just getting back to parity, but removing the copper from your deck. So you don't want to add coppers to your deck just so you can remove them later with Spice Merchant. The reason where this might come up with Spice Merchant is if Spice Merchant is the only plus buy on the board, and so you absolutely need to add treasures. You can't just buy them with extra buys, because the only buys come from Spice Merchant. And if you're buying a treasure so that you can get the plus buy, then what did the plus buy do for you? Nothing, right? So you really need to really want plus buy for this to be viable, because in a lot of cases you should just say, okay, I'm not going to have plus buy, I'm just going to go for single province, right? That's very often going to be better than to try to jump through the hoop to add a beggar to your deck so that you can trash stuff with your Spice Merchant, whatever. And so the biggest situation this is going to come up where for some reason plus buy is super important. You probably want multiple Spice Merchants in this case, so they can chew through the extra coppers and then also give you multiple plus buy at the end of your turn. It's quite rare that this is going to come up, but it can come up. It can also come up with like a card like Forager. Again, this is going to be even harder because probably you just don't thin so aggressively and just time your buys a little bit better than trying to jump through the hoops of thinning so aggressively and then adding a beggar and then getting the extra coppers and then trashing them down all the time. Like, that's a lot of extra hoops as opposed to just, okay, I'm going to thin a little slower so I have the plus buy when I need it, right? Or just only go for single buy. but it can come up with Forager. Maybe there's some super rare cases where it could come up with like Trade Route or Salvager or stuff. Um, Probably a little bit more real than those are Puka. So like if you have a few Pukas in your deck and you play a Beggar, that can be real, like a way to actually get draw. Um, Hideout, yeah, if you need it to be your village, and having a village is super good, but you need to have more cards that you can trash. I don't know why a village would be super good without a way to gain extra cards anyway. So that's almost never going to come up, but I guess it could. Puka's kind of real because it actually does eventually precipitate draw for you. Um, Vampire Bat, maybe, but again, like doing the extra work of adding a Beggar to your deck and then playing the Beggar is just worth this so rarely. The one case where this is actually kind of really real is with Tomb. So Tomb and any kind of good, fairly strong trashing scores you points, and maybe you just need to shove cards in your deck so you can trash them so you can score points. So like with Watchtower, if a Watchtower in hand, you play Beggar, you trash 3 cards, that's just 2-cost action that gains 3 points with Tomb, right? That's not something to be sneezed at. But obviously Watchtower isn't necessarily the most efficient trasher in the world. If you've got a chapel or something, if you've got a forge, if you've got some way that you can trash cards very efficiently, very effectively, maybe these spice merchants or money lenders or whatever, then yeah, if you have a very strong, efficient trashing and Tomb, then Beggar can help you score points this way. Having said that, again, very often, even in these cases, there's going to be something better to do, or just like, score provinces faster. But as a comeback mechanism, and if gains are a little bit tight but trashing is powerful, Tomb might be a reason to add Beggar to your deck. It's not a never thing. The next synergy I want to talk about is Tower. So the idea here is that you're going to empty the copper pile and score a lot of points off of Tower. So in order to do that, you need to actually empty the copper pile before the game ends. If you're playing a 2-player game and there are no heirlooms, you start with 46 coppers in the supply. There's 60 coppers in the stack. 7 of them are in your deck, 7 of them are in your other player's deck. So it's 46 in the supply. You need to gain 46 before the game is over, or you've scored almost nothing and you spent a long amount of time doing very, very little. Because if it doesn't get empty, you're very much holding the bag. I don't know what the etymology of holding the bag is. Holding the bag means like you paid for something and you've invested a lot and you're hoping for a return, but like somebody else runs off with the return and you never get it. Here, nobody else is really running off with the turn. You just never get the return, right? You're investing a lot and you're not getting a return back. You're not getting the benefit of what you've invested for. And so that can be problematic. If you do get it done, let's talk about if you do get it done. Then you're going to have 53 coppers in your deck. That's 53 points, which is more than 8 provinces. Now, if your opponent hasn't trashed their coppers, they're going to get 7 points as well. So that's 46 points net. That's a little bit less than all 8 provinces. So you're going to need to score more than your opponent in terms of other points in order for this to work. That might come from emptying Beggars. It might come from getting more duchies than your opponent. You need them to kind of not empty like an action pile, or to be able to 3-pile after this happens. So this is actually not that strong of a strategy. It really isn't. On weak boards, it can come up. It can be real. If you're not being mirrored, then it's super important to get the copper pile emptied first and foremost. So this is going to mean you buy Beggar every single turn. You play Beggar every time you can. And at a certain point, maybe it's when the Beggars are out, maybe a little before then, uh, you buy coppers because you just need to get it out faster. And you need to watch how the game is progressing, whether you need the beggar points in order to empty, in order to win, right? You need the points from emptying the beggars, the tower points there. Whether you need to get the beggar points from the points from tower from beggar emptying in order to help you to win, or whether it's more important that you just get those coppers emptied fast enough. So it depends on what your opponent's doing, how quickly they can end the game, how they're ending the game, that kind of thing. So be on the lookout for that. Also, like if they're trying to end the game on a 3 pile, which is plausible, very plausible with towers, right, you might need to not lower beggars more because that's going to help your opponent. You're only going to have beggar points. They can like buy the last beggar or two or something, and they've emptied 2 other piles, and then suddenly poof, the game empties on you, and you're left holding the bag. And I'm going to keep using this expression, but anyway, um, yeah, it's tough because you need to be able to empty the coppers. You probably are emptying the beggars, but then you need some way to end the game before they can score enough points, which is very possible because it's also just not that fast, right? Sometimes your opponent can just empty all the provinces on a good, a good board, which is a little bit less likely with beggar, but they could just empty all the provinces before you get the coppers gone, or they empty another pile and the provinces slightly after you get the coppers gone, and just like it's not that strong, but it's not totally ignorable. If the board is weak enough, I think it's worth going for, some. It's a small but certainly not trivial percentage of the time. So do think about it on a board where those two are there, and think about you either want to have a plan to do it or have a plan to beat it. And it's not that hard to have one of those two plans, but you need to have a plan, is I guess what I'm saying here. So next, let's go to Triumph. There's a couple of ways of doing triumphy things. Beggar gains you 3 cards the turn that you play it. And so then if you buy a Triumph, if that's all you've done on the turn is play the Beggar, play your treasures, buy a Triumph, you're scoring well, exactly 5 points from that Triumph because you've gained 3 cards and then you gain the estate, so that's 4 cards, so you get 4 VP chips, and then you got 1 from the estate, so that's 5 points, and you can start doing that from quite early on. 5 points is almost as much as a province, and it's a lot easier to do than a province. Having said that, you're also still trashing your deck, and you need to score more points than just that because eventually your opponent will score a bunch of provinces and win the game, right? So you need to have a plan and not just head over heels go into it like I'm just going to go beggar, beggar, and then triumph every turn that I play a beggar and buy a beggar the other turns. Like sometimes that's a reasonable thing to do, but pretty often it's not. But having said that, Beggar can be relevant on Triumph boards as a card you get right before you're going to score, and you're going to get some turn where you're getting multiple Triumphs off. If you're going to be buying if you buy 2 Triumphs on a turn, if you played a Beggar that turn, then the Beggar scored you 6 extra points, right? If you play 2 Beggars, they each scored you 6 extra points, right? Every Beggar you play scored you 6 extra points, which is a lot, right? So if you're going to have this multi-triumph turn, incorporating Beggar might be something to think about. On the other hand, you still need to be doing all the other things you need to do to get the big triumph turn off to start with, and Beggar doesn't help you do that. It just scores you more points in those situations. So Beggar isn't often that critical because the critical stuff is setting up your deck to draw and get enough plus buy and have enough money, and the Beggars help you have enough money to get enough of the triumph. So it helps you in that sense, but money is usually like the least hard factor to come by. But it will score you enough points, so it's something you should think about like as you're approaching that big triumph turn. But it's usually not the critical thing on the board. The critical thing on the board is to build your deck well, and then think about getting the Beggars. If the board is super dry, you might go for the triumphs earlier. Beggar triumph thing earlier, but that's not going straight for it is not a super strong strategy. It's just a thing to think about. The bigger thing is like, okay, right before I'm going to go for my big triumphs, if I'm okay blowing up my deck because I'm going to score enough points, maybe I add a beggar. But you also have to realize you are blowing up your deck, which you were probably doing from the triumphs to some extent anyway. But you really need to be scoring enough points from them because if you don't, then you've blown up your deck and you're kind of going to be limping along. And if your opponent can outscore you from remaining estates in the pile, leading to them getting bigger triumphs and or provinces or other sources of points, you could be out in the cold, whatever. You could be out of luck and not in a great way. So Beggar is often at least somewhat relevant on triumph boards, but it's not really the focus as much as triumph is. It's just a way to slightly accentuate the triumphs sometimes, for the most part. Again, there's going to be exceptions to all this, and I always love it when people edge case. I actually do like it when people edge case me in the comments section, so please do that. So let's get to the two strongest synergies we have left before ending this podcast. And the first one of these I want to talk about is Gardens. So Beggar with Gardens is at least potentially really strong. So Gardens is the thing that you want to, it costs 4. You can just buy with just having a deck that's flooded out with coppers. Gardens is there for you, man. But also adding 3 cards to your deck is really good for Gardens. So both sides of Beggar really help Gardens a lot. And right, you want to get enough Beggars that you can add a lot of coppers to your deck quickly, and you want to make sure that you get Gardens fairly quickly. When you go for the Gardens versus adding more Beggars is a little bit tricky, and depends a lot on what your opponent's doing. So if they're mirroring you, winning the Garden Split or not losing the Garden Split in particular is super important. So typically, if you're mirrored, turn 3 is usually when you want to start going for Gardens. If you do it earlier, then okay, you might win the Garden Split. It might not even win the Garden Split because you're not going to hit 4 often enough. But even if you win the Garden Split, then like your opponent having the extra Beggar is going to be able to get them A, potentially another tier of Gardens quite easily, and B, more duchies, and they're probably going to be able to outscore you even in the mirror, even if you do lose the Garden Split like 5-3. But so you usually want to wait until turn 3 to start Gardensing in the mirror. If you're not mirrored, you want to think about waiting longer because playing Beggar every turn for a while, or as many turns as you can, you're not going to do it every turn, but as many turns as you can for a while is pretty important, because if your opponent is not going to mirror you, then you need to make sure that your Gardens are actually worth a lot of points. And to do that, you need to play a lot of Beggars. So you want to wait a little bit longer, maybe not a ton longer, because you still need to make sure you get all of your Gardens in time. It depends a little bit on what your opponent's doing, whether they can, how many Gardens they can reasonably steal from you without hurting themselves too much, or how fast they're going to be doing whatever the other thing that they're doing is, emptying the provinces or whatever. Right. In these games, you're not helping them empty piles at all other than the Gardens pile. So that's going to help the game prolong, because they're going to need all the provinces or to empty 2 other piles. If they're emptying 2 other piles, they also need to be outscoring you at the same time. So usually they need to empty the provinces, and you're not helping them do that at all. So they need to be able to do all of that, but you need to be able to score more than 8 provinces by the time they can empty 8 provinces. And so if you get 8, if all you're going from is 8 Gardens to do that, then you need your Gardens to be worth obviously 6 points each, which means you need to be adding 50 cards to your deck, which is a lot of cards. Every turn you play a Beggar, you're adding 4 cards to your deck, and the other turns you're adding 1. You are not going to be playing a Beggar every turn, but to add 50 cards to your deck, even if you're adding 4 every turn, that's like 13 turns at least. But you're not adding 4 the first 2 turns, so it's 14 turns at least. Realistically, it's going to be 15 or 16 turns before you're getting Gardens to be worth that much. So that is something to be concerned about. There are certainly decks which can empty provinces faster than that. On the other hand, you can also add some duchies. So let's say you're going to get 8 gardens and 2 duchies. Then you only need the gardens to be worth, well, 7 times 6 is 42, so you need 8 to be worth 42. You need them to still be worth 6. If you get 3 duchies, you can have them be worth 5. So 3 duchies and 8 gardens. Yeah, again, that's not going to be that much faster than turn 15 or 16. So it's really going to take about that long. So this is kind of the thing to think about if you're trying to play against Beggar Gardens, is can I empty the provinces, roughly speaking, that fast. Attacks aren't going to hurt Beggar Gardens very much because you just need a beggar in your hand. You can almost surely buy gardens. Getting cursed is not a big deal. Getting discard attacked is not a big deal. Getting your gardens trashed is a big deal. So like Saboteur, very powerful, although you can beggar react sometimes, then you're not playing the beggar though, so that's a thing. But yeah, Beggar Gardens is certainly has the capability of scoring a ton of points. So do watch out for that. Oh, I guess I wanted to mention one other thing way back. I'm going way out of order here, but about coppers not being so bad. Sometimes if you're crypting, again, this is super edge case, but you can crypt them immediately, then that's okay. But yeah, I don't know why it's like a lot of hoops to jump through. Again, those things on their own are not worth it, but I've had it come up in some weird situation that it came up. But let's go on to what I think is the strongest combination, the strongest synergy combo for Beggar, which is Guildhall. So there is a video on this. There's an article on this. They're going to be in the description, so check out the links. But I'm briefly going to describe it here as well. Basically, you get Beggar. You try to get Guildhall as soon as possible. Hopefully turn 3, maybe turn 4. If you're very unlucky later than turn 4. If you're very lucky, turn 1 or 2. But then you just buy Beggar or play Beggar and buy Province. The coffers, so every time you play Beggar, if you have a Guildhall in play, you get 3 coffers along with your 3 coppers in hand. You're almost certainly going to be able to just buy a province just from playing the Beggar. And you should often do that. Occasionally, if you're not being mirrored and you need to get all 8 provinces, you might, if you have not much money, so you have like 4 money in hand because your hand was like Beggar, copper, estate. You have 4 money in hand, you might buy another Beggar instead of getting the province. Or if it would take like all your coffers or something. But usually you just like get the province, man. If it's going to go long enough, getting the Beggar might be good if you're ever going to have to buy a Beggar again, because saving the coffers and having more Beggars, saving the coffers to get the green cards later is better, yada, yada, yada. There's slight optimizations, but for the most part, it's just going to be like, that's only going to come up if your opponent can just like never touch provinces. But if they're going to have to touch provinces, which they usually will, you just buy the province when you can. Otherwise, you buy a Beggar, you play a Beggar, you get the coffers, you play all your money, and you buy a province. And that's more or less the strategy. Very occasionally, again, if you're trying to hyper optimize, you're going to buy like a silver or a copper or something because you just want the one coffer because like next turn matters and the point doesn't, but the getting to province next turn might. So again, that's a tiny optimization that you should think about very tactically and situationally. But for the most part, this is just very, very fast to getting to 4 or 5 provinces in like, I don't know, I don't remember exactly. Check the article and the video, but it's something like 10 or 11 turns or something. So it's very fast. It's very fast. And it has not the best longevity, but it's not horrible longevity. Like turn 14 or 15 or something, you get to 8, I think. Look at the article, the video. It's linked in the description. It'll tell you more about that, but it's a super strong combination. And I think that about does it for Beggar. So let's move on to our kingdom for next week. This is coming from a game I played, game 280317112, and it does have Beggar in it because I heard that feedback that several of you liked that. A couple of you didn't care, but several of you liked it. So we're going to try to have Beggar, well, whatever the card is of the week. For weeks that there are cards, we're going to have those in the kingdom. And today's kingdom, or this week's kingdom, or this episode's kingdom, I should say, you could be listening to this in the far future again. Anyway, the kingdom is Beggar, Native Village, Harbinger, Death Cart, Bandit, Haunted Woods, Journeyman, Spices, Treasury, Grand Market, with the projects Piazza and Citadel, and with shelters. So once more for our audio-only listeners, or just if you want to hear it again, you love the soothing, dulcet tones of my voice, we've got shelters, Beggar, Native Village, Harbinger, Death Cart, Bandit, Haunted Woods, Journeyman, Spices, Treasury, and Grand Market, with the projects Piazza and Citadel. Yeah, let's read Adam's comments. Adam says that he doesn't think the Beggar is good here at all. He's thinking, or particularly good here, rather. But there's a chance of a hashtag tactical Beggar. What he wants to do here, he says he thinks is crunchy, like peanut butter. But he's not super worn on shenanigans. He mostly would do something that would revolve around Haunted Woods, big money, and he thinks he'd probably want the Citadel before his first province, which he guess makes the tactical Beggar look a lot better once he has that. And I guess he says he guesses Beggar isn't nuts here. Obviously, he knew Beggar was going to be in the episode, so he's commenting probably heavier on Beggar than he normally would. Like, it's clear to me from his comments that he doesn't think Beggar is the super important card here, and that he thinks Haunted Woods versus Journeyman versus, some of the other money stuff is going to be more important. But he's not into trying to do shenanigans with, like, somehow trying to thin off Native Village or get grand markets or that kind of thing going on, which is something that you might try to do here, right? So that's one way you could go. You could try to play for Bandit is another way you might try to go. How much you go into spices, how much you try to use the spices maybe to get an early Citadel is something to think about. As a slight spoiler alert for the game, Beggar did play a role, and Harbinger played a role. So Harbinger played a significant role. So the bigger spoiler for the game is this was very much a learning game to me. At the end of the game, I lost, and I was like, how did that happen? And I'm still trying to kind of process my way through it, but I think my opponent was onto something, and I'm just trying to digest and understand exactly how good it actually was, and maybe if there's ways to optimize it a little bit. It was actually very interesting. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. If you can figure out some weird exotic plan, I love these kinds of exotic plans. But just in general, your comments on this kingdom, the kingdom at the beginning, the format, Beggar, the content, the style, the colors, anything you want to comment on. Probably not the colors. We're not going to do that much on it, but, I don't know. If you like green, leave a comment in the section below saying your favorite color is green. If you like purple, leave a comment in the section below that's saying your favorite color is purple. If you like puce, keep it to yourself. And that's it for another episode of Making Luck, a Dominion podcast. Catch you next time. So I was thinking about trying to do this like kind of mystery reveal on what the main topic of the episode was going to be. Like teased at the beginning, be like, the main topic of our episode this week, or like probably starting with like 2 weeks ago we talked about a very strong card, Cultist. Last week we talked about 3 very weak cards. This week is probably more similar to last week in that the card is weak and situational, but the situations are much stronger than the situations about the cards we talked about last week. So, or at least some of the synergies, right? Not the situationalness as much as the synergy. But anyway, like I was gonna like maybe leave you in the dark and have you try to guess, but then I realized like the episode title is gonna be Beggar, and the thumbnails are gonna show something about Beggar maybe. I don't know. We haven't come up with the thumbnails exactly yet. No, there's some kind of Beggar pizza thing, right? I don't know. You can obviously tell. I haven't seen it at the time of recording, but you obviously have seen it If you're watching on the video podcast, if you're listening to the audio podcast, Ripperoo, Ripperoo, Ripperoni Pepperoni, Pepperoni Pizza, Piazza Beggar, hashtag combo.